Right. And so I'd like to warmly welcome Phil Gregory as our very first speaker of the evening. Phil is of counsel at our Children's Trust and has played a key role as a co-lead counsel in OCT's federal cases, including Juliana versus United States, Lighthizer versus Trump. He also served as co-trial counsel in Navahine versus Hawaii Department of Transportation and was co-lead trial counsel in Held versus the state of Montana. He earned his JD and his MBA from Santa Clara University in California and his BA from Bowdoin College right here in Brunswick, Maine. Phil is going to discuss the work of our Children's Trust, as well as the background and major moments of the Navahine lawsuit. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Phil. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jackson. And I'm going to share my screen, everyone. So please um, tolerate my getting it up and running here. Can everyone see the screen? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So what we're going to talk about here, we'll start with our Children's Trust. And our Children's Trust is a nonprofit public interest law firm. It's based in Eugene, Oregon, but it provides legal work for youth to secure their rights to a safe climate throughout the world. Our legal work is throughout the world. And we're working to protect the climate system for present and future generations and secure these enforceable legal rights to a healthy atmosphere and stable climate based on the best available science. Our legal work, guided by constitutional, public trust, and human rights laws, aims to secure systemic, science-based climate recovery planning and remedies at federal, state, and global levels. And I want to just pause here for a moment. When we talk about systemic, what we're talking about are problems that cannot just be solved to stay in the climate space by saving a polar bear or shutting down a power plant. It's like with segregation. There's lunch counters, there's buses, there's hotels. It's ubiquitous, and so you've got a systemic problem. So you've got to figure out the best way to solve it, especially when politicians are no help. As we all know, the climate crisis is the single biggest driver of health issues for every child born today. And that's one of our experts, and we're going to talk more about our experts later, Lisa Patel at Stanford, and public health issues are really the forefront for youth in our litigation. Our litigation has three general themes. That science-powered solution. In other words, we trust the science. Here on the left side of the slide is the Keeling curve, which shows, based on data from, coincidentally, the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, essentially what's going on a CO2 parts per minute. Parts per million, I said minute, parts per million. When the Keeling curve started with measurements, it was at 316 parts per million. It's now over 425. And what we're trying to do, based on the science, is return atmospheric CO2 to 350 or below. Another theme in our litigation is that it's youth powered. We trust the children. Children are involved in all our cases. They don't pay anything for our legal fees, and we hopefully represent them in a trauma-informed way in dealing with the climate crisis. And finally, we trust democracy. We really try to trust the court system because youth don't have a voice in the ballot box. So the children have to turn to the courts for protection. One of our prominent cases is the federal case Juliana versus the United States. We're not going to talk about that case today. However, there's a Netflix documentary, a documentary on Netflix called Youth v. Gov, Youth versus Gov, and it's about the Juliana case. And if you have a Netflix account, please go take a look at Youth v. Gov. It's a fascinating documentary on the role of youth in a case against the federal government that started with us suing the Obama administration. What we're talking about here with Hawaii and Maine are constitutional protections afforded by state constitutions. And if you see here on this graph, you've got some 6 states that have constitutional protections that Montana, Hawaii, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts, and then different other what I'm going to call levels or types of protection. So, for example, Maine is white on this chart because Maine recognizes the right to food, for example. It doesn't have the same constitutional level, a state constitutional level of protection that Hawaii does, but it does recognize some rights. And we've brought cases throughout the United States and also have additional cases in development. So as you see here, we have cases in Hawaii, Alaska, Montana, Utah, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida, and cases in development and on the verge of hopefully bringing those cases in Arizona, Texas, Illinois, and North Carolina. And we hope shortly to have Maine join this as an active case that we're pursuing. And why do we use the courts? Well, as our judge in the Juliana case wrote in November 2016, Judge Ann Aiken wrote, "A strong and independent judiciary is the cornerstone of our liberties, and it must not slip from its role as a co-equal branch of government." Let's talk quickly about where climate change and transportation are in Maine. We all know climate change is already having negative impacts in Maine, and if not addressed, will have devastating effects on the state. Maine's pledged to be climate neutral by 2045, and you're going to hear a lot of parallels to what I'm about to say on Maine when we talk about what went on and is going on in Hawaii. Maine's committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 45% below 1990 levels by 2030 and by at least 80% by 2050. And the renewable portfolio standard in Maine requires 80% renewable energy by 2030 and a goal of 100% by 2050. What's important to note here in Maine is that the transportation sector is responsible for over 50% of greenhouse gas emissions or GHG emissions in Maine. And electrification of the transportation sector has been identified by the governor and the various departments as one of the most effective emission reduction strategies for Maine. In fact, they developed a clean transportation roadmap designed to accelerate the widespread adoption of EVs or electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and other clean transportation technologies for Maine. With that, by way of background, so you kind of generally understand where things are in Maine, let's turn now to the Navahine case. And here we have a photograph at the end of the case of some of the youth plaintiffs celebrating. And I'll tell you why they're celebrating. So the case was brought on June 1, 2022, by 13 young people from Hawaii, ranging in age from 9 to 18. The case is a constitutional lawsuit. And what I'm trying to differentiate in making sure you understand constitutional, we're not talking about bringing what's called a statutory claim or a tort claim or something along those lines. What we're talking about is purely asserting that the Hawaii government was in violation of the state constitution, in particular, the Hawaii Department of Transportation, or what we're going to call today HDOT. The lawsuit asserted that HDOT's operation of a transportation system resulting in high levels of greenhouse gas emissions violated the youth's state constitutional rights, impacting their ability to live healthful lives in Hawaii now and into the future. And what were the youth being affected by in Hawaii? Well, first off, the youth were from several of the islands of Hawaii, and they were already experiencing a variety of climate harms. There was an increase in extreme weather events causing flooding, wildfires. There was damage to coral reefs, fish pond, native species, with barriers to growing traditional food, native plants. And there were other threats. And what I want to talk about here in terms of a threat, by way of an example, is what happened in the Maui fires. We all heard about those fires, but it was devastating to that community. And it was devastating in a way that was unnecessary. Because if you think about Hawaii, it doesn't need to bring in fossil fuels for it to have 100% energy. In fact, one of our experts, Dr. Mark Jacobson from Stanford, testified to that effect. There's no need for Hawaii to have fossil fuels. The same testimony, again, would apply to Maine. There's no need for Maine to bring in fossil fuels because it can solely work off of solar, wind, and water energy. But yet these youth were facing these climate impacts and caused them to bring this lawsuit. The children of the land are in Hawaiian Keiki o ka aina, and I'm horrible at pronouncing, but I hope I got it right. But they really have deep care and responsibility for Hawaii. And they assert these rights as a necessary form of practicing their traditional customs. And finally, they view themselves as trustees for future generations. And that's why the state legislature set a goal to decarbonize Hawaii's economy and achieve a zero emissions transportation sector by 2045. For in Hawaii, and this is what we know in Maine, there's been a huge issue on the Green Amendment. Here's the language of the constitutional right in Hawaii. Each person has the right to a clean and healthful environment as defined by laws relating to environmental quality, including control of pollution and conservation, protection and enhancement of natural resources. Any person may enforce this right against any party, public or private, through appropriate legal proceedings. So Hawaii has a statewide target to sequester more atmospheric carbon and greenhouse gases than emitted within the state as quickly as practicable, but essentially no later than 2045. And it's the goal of the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and achieve zero emissions across all transportation modes within the state. However, even though Hawaii was committed to achieve these emissions reductions, the state had not done enough to meet its goals when we filed the lawsuit in June of 2022. the transportation sector had been and remained the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the state. So while Hawaii had taken significant steps to move its electricity sector away from fossil fuels, HDOT was struggling to eliminate fossil fuel dependence. And without any change, essentially, were our lawsuit not to have been filed or were not to have succeeded, the transportation center would be the culprit behind a full 60% of the state's emissions by 2030. So let's look at a couple graphs to demonstrate this. So this figure shows in two time frames. One, the historical time frame of 1990 to 2019, and the second projected 2020 to 2045 greenhouse gases for Hawaii broken down by transportation, that's red, non-transportation energy black, and non-energy blue. And this data comes from the state of Hawaii itself. And you can see the projection that had we not gone after HDOT, where the transportation sector would be in terms of emissions of greenhouse gases in Hawaii. Clearly, transportation was not prepared to change. And yet, what is the budget in Hawaii for transportation? You can see 55% of the funds in Hawaii, state funds, go to transportation. So transportation is a huge part of the government in Hawaii. Now, what were the youth seeking? Sometimes people look at our cases and think that our youth are seeking some form of monetary relief. They hear about cases where there's people are seeking judgments or governments are seeking judgments against fossil fuel companies for dollars. That's not what the remedies the plaintiffs were seeking here. What they were seeking is a declaration that HDOT actions and omissions were inconsistent with the Constitution and state laws. And then what essentially the youth wanted was for the HDOT to align itself, the court to order HDOT to align itself with what was going on with the rest of the state. And I just want to stop here 1 second and point out what an amazing job these youth plaintiffs did. They assisted us in preparing the complaints. They assisted us in declarations. They sat for deposition where they were grilled by private attorneys from the firm of Morgan Lewis, as well as the state attorney general's office. And they were prepared to go and testify in trial. Despite all these problems, they were prepared to do it without restraint. They all stood up there in their depositions, and you all would have been so proud of the way they handled themselves. The Navahine case raised generational equity issues. The climate-related harms there seriously, disproportionately affected younger people, and they were going to proliferate over time unless something was done. I want to just do a quick shout out. We had a number of the world's foremost experts in cutting edge science, in transportation, decarbonization, climate, health, and more. And all these experts sat for extensive depositions and were prepared to testify at trial. And with that, Andrea, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Jackson, do you want to introduce Andrea?
Yeah, I'd love to, and thank you so much, Phil. Yeah, so very pleased to welcome Andrea Rogers, who is the Deputy Director of U.S. Strategy at Our Children's Trust. Andrea has represented youth in constitutional climate change lawsuits against various governments. She served as counsel of record in cases such as Juliana versus United States and Lighthizer versus Trump, as well as Navahine versus Hawaii Department of Transportation. Andrea earned her JD from Arizona State University and her BA from the University of California, Santa Barbara. So, Andrea, welcome, and I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jackson. Thank you, Phil. And we're really lucky today to be joined by one of our Navahine plaintiffs, Kaliko. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the case was resolved, and then we'll talk about the work that Kaliko is doing as a plaintiff and implementing the settlement. I think this case didn't get as much coverage as some of our other cases because it ultimately ended in a settlement agreement. And oftentimes, when you think of settlement agreements, it's sort of, compromise, both sides, not that exciting of a remedy. But this remedy is really, it's honestly the best remedy that's ever been issued in any climate change case. And I don't say that lightly. We're probably some of the only folks to read every single climate change case that's been litigated since the 1980s. And this settlement agreement is really, really groundbreaking. A lot of work went into it, and as often happens, we really settled on the eve of trial. Both sides were ready to get to work. Phil had his ties all picked out. We were ready to go to trial, and we ended up settling the case. It took a lot of work. With the Attorney General's office, and importantly, the leadership of the youth plaintiffs, as well as the leadership of Ed Sniffen, who's the Department of Transportation, the head of the Department of Transportation. The governor really delegated the authority to him to really find a solution, and they really decided that working with the youth as opposed to against the youth was really what's in the best interest of these young plaintiffs. Next slide, Phil. So here's I'm just going to go through, sort of walk the key parts of the settlement agreement. It is short, and it's something that's material that's available. So I really encourage you to read it because I think it does put together a really strong tale of, what is the solutions needed to resolve the climate crisis when you're looking at transportation. And first and foremost, it affirmed that young people like Kaliko and other citizens of Hawaii have the state constitutional right to a life sustaining climate system. And the Supreme Court had previously made that recognition as part of, they had relied upon the decision in Juliana versus United States. And the Department of Transportation acknowledged that that was a constitutional right that constrained their authority with respect to how they implement transportation policies in the state. They also recognize that best science is what's needed to protect children's rights, and that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible so that we can try to get global atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations back down to around 350 parts per million. And the last time we were there was in the 1980s. So we have a lot of work to do, but the solutions are fairly straightforward in order to get there. And the state also agreed to take all actions necessary to achieve zero emissions no later than 2045 for all ground transportation in the state, all marine transportation in the state, and then for inter-island air transportation. So for the airplanes that fly between the different islands. So a lot of emissions from Hawaii's transportation system are due to international and other domestic flights off islands to the mainland or off the islands to other jurisdictions. That is not technically covered within the settlement agreement, but the Department of Transportation has really sort of brought that in to their implementation work, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. One of what makes this settlement really unique and special, and really this was a challenge getting the state to agree to, is that the court has retained supervision of the settlement through 2045 or when they achieve zero emissions, whatever happens faster. And why that's important is it now means that you have all three branches of government working together to achieve climate justice. You have the legislature has created the targets and sort of the broad policies. You have the executive branch really implementing those policies and developing the plans and putting it to work on an individual transportation project basis. And you have the courts there as a backstop in case something happens under the settlement agreement, if HDOT gets off track, or if they don't implement something that they agreed to, the courts can step in and make sure that they're doing the job. So it really is the one example of all three branches of government. We have stories in other states where you have the governor doing executive orders, or you have the legislature passing laws, or you have the court rendering good decisions. This is really all three branches are working together. And I think what we've learned through history is you really need that when you're dealing with these very pernicious, complex, systemic problems. Next slide, please. So here we are, we're essentially 1.5 years in. One of the main steps that the Department of Transportation did was they created a greenhouse gas reduction plan. They ended up changing the name of that with a new administration in DC. There was some concerns about using the words greenhouse gas reduction. So it's called the Energy Security and Waste Reduction Plan, which is kind of funny, but we didn't really want to object to a simple name change. But they created that plan, and that's really the roadmap, identifying all of the policies that need to be implemented and the policies within HDOT that need to be changed in order to achieve zero emissions. They have agreed to update that plan on an annual basis, and then sort of after they do that within the next few years, then they'll be updating it on a 5-year basis. As part of that plan, they created interim benchmarks, so really shorter time periods that they need to achieve greenhouse gas reductions, as well as vehicle miles traveled reductions as well. And what we'll hear Kaliko talk a little bit about is the settlement agreement. They created a Youth Transportation Council. It's really the first time young people have a seat at the table with government to implement the policies needed to implement the settlement agreement. Some of these, reforming HDOT project evaluation methodology sounds extremely boring, but it really is the meat and potatoes of the settlement agreement, because they have really shifted how they prioritize and rank projects that get funding from the state legislature. And what that does is when you prioritize projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions as opposed to increase greenhouse gas emissions, that completely reshapes how the transportation dollars are spent and how people are getting around in the state. So now, because of that transformation, there's much higher priority on funding bicycle, pedestrian, transit projects, and not spending a lot of money on expanding roads, which in turn just allows and facilitates more single car drivers. So that part of the switch in methodology has really been transformative in the state. The department created an entire 3 new leadership positions that are implementing the settlement agreement, and they are really doing a culture shift within the agency. They hired a woman named Laura Ka'akua, who is really remarkable, an incredible leader who is doing everything she can to really infiltrate, for lack of a better term, sort of all of the different departments and really educate these. Most of the employees at the Department of Transportation are highway engineers. They build roads. That's sort of the culture that they come from. So she's really doing her best to infuse and educate about the need for more sustainable transportation policies. They have agreed to complete their bike, ped, and transit network within the next 5 years. They have agreed to planting a number of native trees, and they've sort of gone above and beyond with that. And they're also agreed to commit $40 million immediately to EV charging infrastructure, and then coming up with plans thereafter to increase that investment. Next slide, please. Again, why is this unique? I mean, we really don't have anything like this in any U.S. state or in any other country for that matter. It really sets forth a model for how to decarbonize transportation. It really hits on what the priorities are in terms of you electrify everything, you invest in bike, ped, and transit, you try to get people out of their cars, you improve the infrastructure. And the other thing that's very unique about this settlement is that in order to approve it, which the court did, the court had to find that complying with the settlement is fair and in the best interests of children in Hawaii. And that was a requirement because the young people were plaintiffs. The court had to make that finding in order to approve a settlement agreement to which they are a party. So no court had ever made the finding that reducing transportation emissions for zero is what is in the best interests of these young people. But they did that in this case, which is really remarkable, and that really has implications internationally. Best interest of the child you see in U.S. law most often in terms of guardianship or in others sort of child dependency cases. But in many countries, it's starting to be imported as a principle of fundamental justice in the human rights context in climate change cases. So it's really exciting to see sort of Hawaii state law is bridging that gap. Next slide, please. And here, this is the Youth Transportation Council that is up and running. And maybe, Kaliko, this is a good time. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about your involvement in the case. Are you able to join us? I know you guys are having a pretty bad storm.
Hi, yes, I would love to answer some questions.
Awesome. So, Kaliko, do you just want to give a short introduction, and then you and I can have a little conversation about your role in the settlement agreement? Does that sound good?
Sure. Aloha everybody. My name is Kaliko. I am 15 years old and I go to Lahaina High School. And I am from the west side of Maui, and I was a plaintiff in the Navahine versus H. Dot case.
Awesome. So, Kaliko, can you tell us a little bit more about how has the climate crisis impacted your life and your community?
Sure. I now have lost my home due to two natural disasters that were made worse by climate change. First in 2018 to Hurricane Olivia and a flood, and second in 2023 to the Lahaina fires. So I've experienced that, and it's definitely affected my community a bunch.
Yeah. And why did you decide to be a plaintiff in the Navahine case? Most young people aren't excited to go to court. What drove you to this work?
I've always had like a drive to advocate for my future since I was very young. I testified my first time on a styrofoam ban when I was 5 years old. When I got an opportunity to become a plaintiff in this big case, it just want it. Sorry, my drive was just to make sure that other kids didn't have to experience things that I've been through.
And then after you got the incredible settlement agreement, what made you decide to continue your work as a member of the Youth Transportation Council?
You know, honestly, I don't think I'm ever gonna stop doing work like this. Getting the opportunity to become a part of a youth council that's working like directly with a body of government, um, I don't know, it's kind of just like the next stepping stone, you know?
Yeah. And what have you liked so far? What's the experience been like on the Youth Transportation Council? Do you have any sort of highlights?
I think maybe like my favorite thing is just like being able to talk to people my age about this kind of stuff. Like, not everybody in my school or like my friends like are super interested in stuff like this. So just being able to conversate with my peers and make connections that I know will last a lifetime is pretty cool.
And what are some of the transportation impacts from climate change that you're seeing in Maui in your own community?
Probably as somebody from the west side of Maui, we have a lot of roads that are coastal, like right next to the ocean, and like recently I have seen a lot of erosion, like a lot. When every time I go to the other side of Maui, like on that road on the way there, um like the waves come on top of the road. So just like the sea level rising is affecting us a lot.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you give to other young people who are seeing climate impacts in their own communities? Because I know there's a lot of youth in Maine who are interested in dealing with climate change. So, what advice would you give to them about getting involved and protecting their rights in this area?
Honestly, just get involved. Like, I know a lot of, especially Gen Z and just like this period that we are all in, it's like, some people might think it's embarrassing to try to enjoy stuff like this. So, my advice to youth is don't be shamed, don't be embarrassed, just get involved because whatever Stacy from third period thinks about you isn't gonna matter in the future. So, just get involved. It's not embarrassing and you can make a difference. And don't let any adult tell you otherwise.
Awesome. Thank you, Kaliko. I appreciate it. All right, we'll keep on rolling through the settlement, and we'll have an opportunity to talk to Kaliko again towards the end. So next slide, please. So here's the waste reduction. I never remember the name of it. The Energy Security and Waste Reduction Plan. It's so funny how language gets tricky as we try to avoid politicians that don't like these issues that we work on. But here again is another roadmap. Many different states have sort of the policies and strategies to reduce emissions from transportation are fairly straightforward, and there's a strong amount of agreement in terms of what works, what doesn't work. So things that work, even though the communities are very different in Hawaii or in Maine, the strategies are very similar in terms of how do you reduce transportation emissions. So I think for those of you in Maine who are interested in these issues, I think this waste reduction plan can be very helpful in that regards in terms of where do we start, what are the policies we should be advocating for. Next slide, please. The another thing, and this is something that Kaliko has been working on as part of the Youth Council, is in November, HDOT released its priority multimodal network plan. So it's part of, they're supposed to complete these bike, ped, and transit networks. So here's the plan that really identifies where those need to be and areas to prioritize. This is a really important part to get community engagement and adoption. And places, when you're in Maine, there's a lot of different bike paths or walking paths that people want to see constructed. And so it's really important to get those into the planning documents in an early stage. And the Navahine settlement is really making that a priority. Next slide, please. And here's the tree planting initiative. It was funny, when HDOT suggested this as part of the settlement agreement, we didn't really think this would be that big a deal, but it ended up being something that the community really has embraced. And people in Hawaii are very excited about it, and they've been doing a lot of work. HDOT, Departments of Transportation, they own a lot of land because they have all the different rights of way associated with the roadways. So there's a lot of opportunity there in terms of reforestation and increasing carbon sequestration. So it's been very exciting to see this happen, and the folks at HDOT have been very excited about the results. Next slide, please. And what we're doing right now is we're engaged in the legislative session. The Youth Council has created their own bill that they are supporting. It's called Keiki Ride Free, where all young people under the age of 18 would be able to ride on all transit in Hawaii free of charge. We currently have that system in Seattle, and it has really increased youth participation and ridership and access to transit. So it's something that's being pushed forward in the legislature today. Next slide, please. The other strategy that we're working on is we're working with one of our experts who said, now that we're losing federal programs to support EV adoption, it's really important that the states step up. Driving an EV is cheaper than driving a fossil fuel over the total cost of owning the vehicle. What's difficult is the price point. The initial price point for electric vehicles is still a little bit higher than fossil fuel vehicles. It's come down quite a bit, but it's still a little bit higher. So this bill would help solve and fix that gap. It imposes a fee on fossil fuel cars, which then goes to rebate purchasers of electric vehicles. And it has a lot of mechanisms built in where it has affordability mechanisms. So there's different step ups in terms of who is able to qualify for the program. But it's exciting to see, and there's a number of hearings right now in the legislature where many of the youth are testifying in support of these bills. Next slide, please. Next slide. There's just more details about that. Here's the bill that Kaliko and her colleagues have been working on. It's really exciting to see something like this pass. And again, I also think it sort of educates people from a young age about the benefits of transit. I think part of our car culture is that that's what you learn. You get into a car. That's how you get to and from different places. And this bill would really help create a solution. And the young people have really gotten behind this. And it was originally an idea from youth who were working as part of the Youth Climate Coalition, and it's really exciting to see their ideas translated into potential law. Next slide. Next slide, please. And the last bill that the youth are working on is for EV charging infrastructure. This is getting all the more important because of what's happening at the federal level, where they're really trying to get rid of funding programs to support electric vehicle charging. This bill would take some money it's a tax that's already imposed on every barrel of oil that is imported into the state of Hawaii. And it would take a little bit of that existing tax and apply it to EV charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. All right, and this is one of our plaintiffs, Riley Brook. She's, like Kaliko, one of our fellow youth plaintiffs, and we like to close on what Riley has to say about the settlement agreement and why she has hope. You know, being heard and moving in unity with the state to combat climate change is incredibly gratifying and empowering. This collaboration marks a pivotal step towards preserving Hawaii for future generations, one that will have a ripple effect on the world. I hope our case inspires youth to always use their voices and to hold leaders accountable for the future they will inherit. So I will end it there, and I'll turn it over to John.
I can give a quick introduction of John and let him take the stage. So John is going to talk a bit about some possible exciting future opportunities for youth action in Maine. And so John first visited Maine 60 years ago and fell in love with our beautiful coastline and our mountains, and has been a resident of Maine for the past couple decades. And he's passionate about finding innovative ways to preserve and protect our wonderful natural resources. John also earned his BA from Bowdoin College in Brunswick and his JD from Boston College Law School. So John, welcome, and I will hand it over to you. You're still muted.
How's that?
That's great.
There we go. Thank you. So, thank you. I will start by saying a couple things. One, I think Kaliko just about brings tears to my eyes when I hear her explain why she wanted to get involved, and not just the two devastating experiences to her home that are related to climate change and emissions, but just generally to be that energetic and desirous of being involved is really wonderful. So thank you, Kaliko. Kind of along those lines, a pretty famous artist, a guy named Picasso, said something to the effect at one point that he was trained for much of his life to paint like the Italian masters, but it took him years and years and years to learn to paint like a child again. And that his most famous and most beautiful works of art were those that he painted after he learned to paint like a child again. And I mention that because I think it's so important. Not only are kids the ones who are most affected because of potential physical vulnerability, just young bodies. And so emissions have a significant effect on their development and also emotionally their development, but also just as a practical matter, they're going to be around a lot longer. But the beauty of youth is that kids are not burdened with the decades and decades of well, this is the way it is, that the law tells people or legislatures tell people. So I am just really hopeful that kids get involved and be creative and don't look at things as they have been necessarily, other than to think about how they can be changed, but play the what if game, ask questions, come up with the ideas of an open, youthful, dreamlike mind that kids have. So I think a few of the things that are going on right now, and then I want to specifically ask Jackson about Maine Youth for Climate Justice programs, opportunities, and resources. But some of the things that I've seen that are pretty interesting are people pushing for the Pine Tree Amendment. That still has not been passed. It would really it's not impossible by any means to have a Navahine type result in Maine without a Pine Tree Amendment, but it sure would um, make things a little bit more direct and smoother. Um, we have a Food Sovereignty Act, which is, and also more recently, a food waste bill, which is the yield of efforts of a number of people over a few years. And the food waste bill, I think, is particularly important, and people should be mindful of it. It doesn't really go into effect until 2027, but food waste works out to, if we were able to address food waste successfully, taking 400,000 vehicles off the road every year. So what I think why that's important is to be thinking broadly and creatively about ways that there are solutions, and certainly issues dealing with DOT are the most significant just by virtue of volume of greenhouse gases generated. But there are other things that people need to be thinking about. Um, Look at it, the issues broadly, and people have mentioned these in the last few minutes here, Kaliko and Andrea particularly, but on a local level, sometimes, being able to go to a town meeting and talk about the funding for a bike path, for walking paths or sidewalks, the trains, public transportation is there's as a couple of the urban centers grow and people are commuting more for work purposes, to have better public transportation that is electric would be really significant. The advent of electric planes certainly significant for intra-island transport in Hawaii, but there's no reason we shouldn't be having electric planes and electric helicopters doing certain things in the state of Maine. Electric boats, for whether it's the Department of Transportation and ferry services for Casco Bay and Penobscot Bay, or people who are in the fishery, whose lives are being really seriously impacted by climate change and their decreased ability to harvest fish. If there were more electric boats and fewer internal combustion engine driven boats, would be a real good thing. So I let me go to that question. Jackson, could you share with us, please, what programs, opportunities, and resources that Maine Youth for Climate Justice offers for Maine youth who want to try and get involved in some of these issues?
Yeah, of course, and thanks for the question. We have a number of different programming and resources for youth who do want to kind of get started in this process. For example, if they're interested in engaging with our state legislature, we host, you know, testimony workshops and trainings, how to write testimony, how to speak before legislators and a legislative committee. And we also offer other kinds of, trainings about the legislature, about, how does it work, what kinds of opportunities or pathways are available to get involved, as well as things like, engaging with our local publications and newspapers. A lot of people are interested in writing letters to the editor or op-eds in their hometown newspapers as a way of expressing their opinions and their voice. And we have trainings for those kinds of activities as well. In addition to that, each year, Maine Youth for Climate Justice has an annual Youth Day of Action, which is a gathering of youth from across the state at our state capitol. And that's an opportunity for youth to talk with their legislators, to participate in a rally, to advocate for bills and policies that they're interested in. So those are just a few examples of some of our work and programming.
That's super helpful, Jackson. Thank you. And I think also if kids can be thinking about their personal experiences, the what the actual harm is from climate change in their lives. And as Kaliko was mentioning, if those are things that are significant enough and generate enough kind of fire in your belly, uh, it's not clear if it is possible to jump right from kind of where we are to having a Maine Youth Transportation Council, simply by approaching DOT and saying, this is what we want to have. It is possible that there is a need to have at least started some kind of an action that would involve Maine youth plaintiffs, and telling their stories as Kaliko did. And then the yield from that would be that there would be a very constructive negotiating process and resulting in a settlement agreement as happened in Navahine. And, we need to be thinking about doing things that will um, protect the process and the ability for kids to be involved, to get some generational equity in this situation, and not something that a different administration could change. Um, you know, Governing the state, that's the direction that the state's going. So it would be wonderful if people can think about the experiences that they're having in their own lives about the way climate change is affecting them now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Appreciate that. And just want to quickly thank all of our speakers for being here tonight and for sharing their perspectives and their experiences.
I'm going to
Um,
stop the
oh,
screen
yeah, go
share.
for it. Yeah. We have had a number of questions submitted, and I just want to get to one of those, the first being for Kaliko, if you're still with us. We had a participant ask, regarding your experience on the Youth Council, do you feel that the Hawaii Department of Transportation listens to you and respects you and hears your feedback? Do you ever feel dismissed or tokenized? And if so, do you have any advice about navigating those relationships and making sure that you remain heard? Kind of two questions in one.
For the first part, The staff at HDOT definitely make sure that all of our opinions are like taken care of. Like we all are very comfortable with speaking our mind. So that is good. There has been one experience where I have tried to speak out about something that's maybe controversial, and that's why I was kind of dismissed. But I try to speak out about what was it? Like maybe trying to limit the amount of rental cars that are being rented out every day, if that was like a possibility. And I was kind of dismissed for that, but I am still going to keep advocating. But otherwise, our youth have been like we've been making a difference. We've been part of the decisions, and it's been a positive experience for me.
Glad to hear that. And we have a kind of another similar question for you about your experience on the being a youth plaintiff and then being on the youth council. So what does the schedule of being on the council look like? How often do you meet? What do the meetings look like? How's that process take shape?
Hey, I might be wrong on this because I am not the best at planning, but I think we do have like a monthly council Zoom meeting, and then there's other like we have committees within our youth council that target more like specific parts of transportation, and then you make your own schedule within those committees. So, and then I think we have at least four in-person meetings every year. So.
Right, and I think the in-person meetings, right? They try to take you and you've had tours of like a biofuel facility and different places on the islands to really learn about how the system is operated and working. So they're trying to mix the policy involvement along with education as well as leadership stuff.
Yes.
That's awesome. And I think kind of a follow-up question, maybe this can go to any of our speakers. Um, how many of the youth plaintiffs from the case currently sit on the Youth Transportation Council?
I can take that one, Kaliko. I believe there's four plaintiffs that are currently on the youth council, and there was just another. They sort of some people have 2 year seats, one, and then there's one group has 1 year seats, and they just had an application process to fill the other seats. And I think, there's about 12 youth on the council. And I think last year there was over 60 applications of young people who are interested in joining. So there really is a lot of interest for youth to get involved on this at this level.
And Kaliko, we have another question for you, if you don't mind. Someone asked, how did you become a youth plaintiff? What did that process look like? Is it something you heard about and got more information for? Is it something you had to apply for? Can you detail what that looked like?
Okay, I cannot remember every single detail because I think I was only maybe 11 or 12 or 10 around
Mhm.
that age. Um, but I remember just hearing it from my auntie. She's like involved with a lot of governmental stuff, I guess. And she was hearing about a lawsuit and they were looking for youth plaintiffs that are interested in advocating for their future and me. So I just got more information about it and then applied and yeah.
Awesome. And I have a question for Phil, actually. When you were starting your remarks earlier, you showed a map of all the states that our Children's Trust has worked in. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it showed that you have worked on at least one case before in Maine. Could you describe what that case was and, if it was related to Navahine versus Hawaii?
Oh no, it was done back in May 2011, if I remember right, Andrea. It was a petition we filed way back in May. In May, of 2011 when we were filing many petitions around the United States on Mother's Day timeframe. So it was predated Navahine by about 9 years.
Awesome. That's helpful to know. And that kind of covered all of the questions we got through the chat, but would love to open it up to everyone in the webinar. And if you have a question, feel free to raise your hands and we can go in order. Yeah, Amy, go for it.
Phil and John, when you said that you're looking for a case maybe coming forth in Maine, are you looking at something in terms of the food for all, since that's the only right that's written into our Constitution right now? Or is it something else?
That's one of the aspects. I mean, we're looking, as we know, the right for food has various permutations. So we're looking at that, but we're also looking at, like we said, transportation issues in Maine and how to address those in a way that allows Maine's governor's office and the various agencies, as well as the legislature, to consider that if you take the settlement, the Navahine settlement in Hawaii, how that can translate, those key points can translate into a settlement or legislation or agency action in Maine. I mean, quite often, as we've learned, Andrea can speak to this as well, it really takes a lawsuit to get people off the dime. And I mean, you have hearings with the legislature and they say the right things, but when it comes time to passing the legislation, it's a watered down whatever, or if it gets passed at all. And a lawsuit forcefully pursued can result, if you've got a governor's office like we had in Hawaii, willing to do a deal in a way that benefits both the governor's office, which it clearly has done in Hawaii. And Andrea, I'd like you to speak about that for a second, but it takes, I'm going to call it, issues off the back of all the others, because now you've got an enforceable settlement agreement. They haven't had to pass legislation. The agency hasn't had to go through the headache of agency action. They've got a settlement, and now we can move forward in on the key points.
Right. And the politicians, it's now an excuse for the politicians to do the right thing. Now they're not tackling the climate crisis if they don't, if it's not just for, random benefit, it's now they have a legal obligation to do that, and a legal obligation to secure the funding and to get the policies implemented. So it really just levels the playing field, because youth often testify in the legislature, and that can be very helpful. But at the end of the day, the legislators will do what they think, is in their own best interest. And this really levels the playing field once you get that recognition of constitutional rights in play.
Oh, John, I think you're on mute.
There we go. I think also that, legislation can be amended and changed depending upon what the political tides bring at a given point. And a decision of a court or some kind of a consent decree or a settlement agreement that's got the imprimatur of a court on it is it still can be changed at some point, but it's a lot tougher. Somebody's got to go through a whole big process. There's got to be change in circumstances that are, tougher to go. So the getting having a suit that then is postured in a way so that there can be some really constructive, collaborative negotiations, as there were in Navahine, has some staying power and some attraction.
Are there any other questions for our speakers? Yeah, Elise.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Phil, if you've had a chance to talk to the folks at the Conservation Law Foundation here in Maine. What we, a couple years ago, or I guess 1 year ago, merged with Maine Youth Action, who was a youth plaintiff in a lawsuit with CLF against DEP. And it had to do with the rejection of clean car rules. Yeah, and I'm just thinking about like some of the legislation we already have.
Yeah, I'm generally familiar with that case. I haven't had a chance to talk to them specifically about that case, but before we move forward with anything, we certainly will. We worked with them in our Massachusetts case that was successful. What, Andrea, again, 10 plus years ago, and we definitely would be very interested in getting their thoughts, getting their interest in participating, because that's, we're going to need everybody's views on what's the best way, what's the best time, and who are the best attorneys to go bring this type of case.
And they also had in an action, there were some procedural limitations that can be addressed, and I think they were clearly they were addressed in Navahine and in Held versus Montana and other of our Children's Trust cases. But those are things that could be remedied, if you will, in an action up here.
We are approaching 7:15, but I'll ask one more time if anyone would like to ask questions for any of our speakers. All right. Well, just want to say thank you to Phil, to Andrea, to John, to Kaliko, especially from joining us from Hawaii. Thank you for being here tonight and uh, contributing your experiences and your perspectives. Um, this webinar has been recorded, so it will be available to watch afterwards. And we'll also be sending along some follow-up materials for you to look at if you're interested, including the settlement agreement, as well as the scope of work of the Youth Transportation Council, along with a couple other resources if you're interested. So that will be sent in a follow-up email to you all tomorrow. Yeah, thank you
And
so much for,
Jackson, I just
yeah.
wanted to say thank you to you and your team, but also to point out to everyone, if you've got any questions, send us an email. It'll be in the materials. Give us a phone call, whatever it is, because we're very interested in moving forward with a case in Maine, but we're also very interested in explaining to you our other cases. Andrea is so interested; she's in her car on the side of the road because she can't wait to talk about these cases.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, and we can include your email address and stuff in the follow-up to participants. So thank you
Thank
all
you
so
all.
much. I hope you all have a great night and thanks for attending.
Thank you.